The silence that followed the final breach was not the silence of peace. It was the administrative silence of an empire resuming its work. On Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453, the world of the Romans ended. By Wednesday, the 30th of May, the mechanisms of the Ottoman state began to process what remained. The public story of the fall of Constantinople is written in gunpowder smoke, naval chains, and the final charge over the corpses piled at the Kirkaporta gate. It is a story that concludes with the figure of Sultan Mehmed II, the 21-year-old fatty, the conqueror, riding his white horse into the church of Hagia Sophia and declaring it a mosque. This is where popular histories often pause, but history does not pause. It merely shifts its focus from the noise of the siege to the quiet of the palace. Our point of inquiry must therefore shift as well. From the broken walls to the Topkapi Palace, still in its early conception, from the fate of a city to the fate of a bloodline. The House of Palaiologos, which had ruled Byzantium for nearly 2 centuries, was extinguished as a ruling dynasty. But its members did not vanish into the smoke. They became assets and liabilities. The men, where identifiable, were often dealt with summarily. The fate of the women, particularly the princesses, was a different calculus. It was not a matter of brute force, but of cold utility. Princess Theodora, daughter of Demetrios Palaiologos, the last despot of the Mora and niece of the final Emperor Constantine XI, existed in this liminal space. She was not in the city during the sack. She was a remnant, a piece of symbolic capital waiting to be appraised and entered into the ledger. Her value was threefold: her Palaiologan blood, which carried imperial legitimacy, her youth, and her gender. In the Ottoman system, these factors did not sentence her to death. They sentenced her to absorption. The initial phase was one of inventory. Ottoman chroniclers, such as Tursun Beg, note the meticulous gathering of notable captives from the ruins. This was not random looting, but a systematic harvest. Theodora, along with other highborn women, would have been separated from the general populace of slaves. They were placed under the guard of the Sultan's trusted kapasibashi, chief gatekeepers. Their identities verified by surviving Byzantine officials who had chosen collaboration over martyrdom. This was the first erasure, the transition from a princess of the imperial house to an entry in a custody log. Mehmed II's actions in these weeks were those of a man building a new Roman empire, with himself as Caesari Rum, Caesar of Rome. To rule a polyglot, multi-confessional empire, he needed more than fear. He needed synthesis. The absorption of Byzantine royal blood into the Ottoman line was a potent political alchemy. It could soften the resentment of the conquered Greek aristocracy. It could provide a veneer of continuity. For Mehmed, the scholar king who read Roman histories, this was a deliberate policy. Thus, Theodora's personal tragedy begins not with a dungeon, but with a decision made in a council chamber. The method was not the sword, but the ceremony. The instrument was not the executioner, but the hoka, teacher, and the kadi, judge. The first and most non-negotiable step was conversion to Islam. This was not presented as a choice, but as a prerequisite for existence within the Sultan's orbit. The ceremony would have been private, perfunctory, and witnessed by Ottoman officials. She would have been given a new name, likely Gulbahar, Spring Rose, or something similarly ornamental, stripping her of the Christian saint she was named for. Her baptismal identity was the first layer of her past to be officially deleted. Following this, she entered the domain of the Harem-I Humyun, the Imperial Harem. This institution was not merely a residence for concubines. It was a highly regulated political and educational complex, a sealed world with its own hierarchies, economies, and ruthless politics. For Theodora, the harem was a gilded sieve designed to filter out her former self. She would be taught Ottoman Turkish. She would be instructed in the intricate protocols of servitude and favor. Her every movement, from the style of her dress to the manner of her speech, would be remade. The psychological pressure of this environment cannot be overstated. It was a world of whispers and silences, where favor meant survival and a misstep could mean oblivion. The other women were not sisters. They were competitors in a silent war for security and influence. Any overt display of grief for her lost world, any whispered prayer to the Christ of her fathers, would have been noted by the eunuch guards or the vigilant Kadınlar, senior women. Her survival depended on her ability to perform her new identity flawlessly. The conqueror's gaze now fell upon her not as a prisoner of war, but as a validated member of his household. The next step was integration. Mehmed II would have granted her in marriage to one of his high-ranking officials or military commanders. This was the standard practice for assimilating valuable female captives of noble birth. Such a marriage served a dual purpose. It rewarded a loyal servant with a wife of prestigious lineage, and it neutered that lineage by tying it irrevocably to the Ottoman apparatus. Theodora's children would be Muslims, Ottomans, and would owe their loyalty solely to the House of Osman. The record of this specific marriage is, tellingly, obscure. Ottoman sources, which meticulously recorded the lineages of sultans and major officials, are quiet on the details of Theodora Palaiologina's life after her entry into the system. This silence is the second, and more profound, erasure. She did not disappear in a dramatic flash. She faded into the meticulously maintained archives of the state, becoming a footnote in the genealogy of some Ottoman pasha, her origin story reduced to a single, sanitized phrase. Of Byzantine noble origin. The walls of the harem were not made of stone alone. They were made of ritual, language, and the constant, quiet pressure to forget. The storm of conquest had passed. Now began the long, cold drizzle of assimilation. The process was not haphazard. It was systematic, engineered by the very intellect that had engineered the fall of Theodosian walls. Maimed II's vision for his new capital, Constantinople, extended beyond urban planning and repopulation edicts. It included the reordering of human souls, particularly those of symbolic weight. The absorption of Princess Theodora was a case study in this social engineering, executed through three interlocking systems: the imperial household, enderun and harem, the legal religious framework of the Shariat and Sultanic decree, canon, and the unspoken machinery of bureaucratic documentation. Upon her conversion, Theodora was transferred from transitional custody into the permanent architecture of control, the Old Palace, and later the Topkapi Palace as it was constructed. The harem was not a single room, but a vast, inward-looking complex, a city within a city. Its gates were guarded by the Kisler Agassi, the chief black eunuch, a figure of immense power who reported directly to the Sultan. He was the warden of this silent world. Theodora's existence within it was governed by a strict cellular hierarchy. At the bottom were novice carriers, servant girls. Through talent, intelligence, and favor, one could ascend to become a Gurzd favorite, an Iqbal, or the ultimate position, a Kadin or Hayski sultan consort. Theodora, entering as a convert of royal blood, likely bypassed the lowest rungs. But this was not a privilege. It placed her under higher scrutiny. Her education intensified. Ahoka would have continued her instruction in Islam, focusing on practical prayer and doctrine, erasing theological nuance. A language tutor would drill her in Ottoman Turkish, the language of power and poetry, while her Greek, the language of her parents, her prayers, her childhood, would have been actively discouraged, allowed to atrophy and disuse. She would be taught to move in heavy Ottoman silks, not the lighter Byzantine fabrics. Her meals would conform to Islamic dietary laws. Every sensory input from her old life was replaced. The most potent psychological device was the principle of Nazar, the gaze. She was under constant, passive observation. The eunuchs watched, the senior women watched, even the other converted women watched, for reporting a lapse in another could curry favor. This created a panopticon effect where the subject internalizes the surveillance. She became her own jailer. Any moment of reverie, any slip into a Greek hymn, any tear for a lost relative had to be suppressed not just out of fear of punishment, but because the act of suppression became second nature. The self was partitioned. A hidden inner crypt for the Princess Theodora, a polished, public facade for the Ottoman woman she was required to be. The legal system provided the cold, formal framework for this transformation. Her conversion was ratified by a cadi. Her new identity was a legal fact. The marriage that awaited her was a nikah contract, overseen by an Islamic judge. These documents were the final nails in the coffin of her former legal personhood. In the eyes of the state and the divine law it upheld, she was no longer a Christian princess. She was a Muslim woman. Any claim to her Byzantine titles or properties was void. The law itself had been weaponized to sanctify her erasure. Then came the marriage. Historical consensus points to her being given to Has Murat Pasha, a prominent military commander and later Grand Vizier. This was a strategic placement. Murat Pasha was a capable and loyal servant, but not of the highest Ottoman dynastic bloodline. Giving him a Palaiologina wife elevated his status, binding him closer to the Sultan, while simultaneously placing Theodora in a household where her royal lineage bolstered her husband's prestige, yet remained subservient to it. She was a trophy, but one kept in a controlled environment. Her role was now defined: to be a wife, to bear children, and to legitimize Ottoman authority over her former people through her very existence in an Ottoman household. The bureaucratic silence is the most eloquent testament to the system's success. The Ottoman state was a prodigious record keeper. Tax rolls, property deeds, court records, correspondence, all were documented. Yet the specific life of Theodora Palaiologina generates only faint echoes. We find her in the margins. A mention in a chronicle. A note in a ledger of gifts distributed after the conquest. Her name absent from the vibrant, detailed histories of the Byzantine court that once would have chronicled her betrothal. Instead, she appears in Ottoman genealogies as the wife of Has Murat Pasha. Her origin is acknowledged, but her story is not. The system did not just assimilate her, it archived her into obscurity. The children she bore Murat Pasha are the ultimate product of this machinery. They were given Turkish, Muslim names. They were raised as Ottomans, educated in the Enderun school for elite service if they were boys, or married into other Ottoman families if they were girls. The Palaiologan blood flowed, but its cultural and religious memory was deliberately diluted, then severed. These children would likely have known their mother was of noble Byzantine stock, a piece of family trivia, not a living heritage. They would have felt no allegiance to a dead empire. The process of oblivion was now biological, encoded in a new generation. Theodora's life became a series of sanctioned performances. The performance of piety at prayer, the performance of loyalty to her husband, the performance of Ottoman motherhood. Each performance reinforced the new identity and buried the old one deeper. The architecture surrounding her, the high walls of the palace, the latticework of the windows, the intricate rules of conduct, was not just physical. It was a metaphysical architecture designed to house a ghost, while convincing the world and eventually herself that the ghost had never existed. The aftermath is not an event. It is a condition. For Theodora, the aftermath was the remainder of her life, lived within the strict parameters defined by the conqueror's calculus. For history, the aftermath is the silence that enveloped her, a silence so complete it becomes a historical fact in itself. We do not know the date of her death. We do not know the location of her grave. There is no memorial, no testament, no recovered personal effect that whispers her name in the Greek script of her birth. The mechanisms of Part 1, absorption, and Part 2, systematization, culminate here in erasure. Following her marriage to Has Murat Pasha, Theodora exits the focused light of even the sparse historical record. She becomes a part of the domestic backdrop of the Ottoman elite. Her husband's career advanced. He served as Beylerbeyi of Rumelia and Grand Vizier. As his wife, her status would have been one of material comfort and social standing. Yet this comfort was the final, most effective layer of the gilded cage. To protest, to mourn publicly, to seek connection with her shattered past would have jeopardized not only her own security but that of her husband and children. The system had granted her a stake in its own continuity. Resistance became an act of self-sabotage. This is the core of the psychological aftermath, the internalization of captivity. The initial trauma of conquest and conversion likely gave way to a more complex, enduring state, a kind of institutional numbness. The daily rituals of her new life, managing a household, participating in the closed social world of other high-ranking women, observing religious rites, would have created a semblance of normalcy. This semblance was the trap. It allowed life to continue, but on terms that systematically alienated her from her former self. The passionate grief of the captive could, over years, cool into the quiet melancholy of the assimilated. Her legacy, therefore, is not one of monuments but of absence. In the great narratives of the fall, she is a footnote. In the genealogical tables of the Palaiologoi, her line ends with a notation, fate unknown or married to an Ottoman pasha. In the Ottoman records, she is a spectral presence, a name without a story. This dual erasure, from the history of her people of origin and from the detailed annals of her people of adoption, is the definitive outcome of maimed II's policy. She was not made a martyr, which would have created a potent symbol of resistance. She was made a wife and a mother within the Ottoman system, which transformed her into an instrument of that system's legitimacy and a nullification of her own past. The silence extends to her children. They were Ottoman subjects. Any claim they might theoretically have had to the Byzantine throne was rendered meaningless by their faith, their language, their culture, and their political loyalty. The Palaiologan bloodline was not exterminated. It was co-opted and neutralized, its symbolic power harvested and then dissolved in the vast ocean of the Ottoman elite. This was a far more effective end than a bloodline simply dying out. It lived on, but it no longer remembered what it was. For maimed II, the fate of Theodora was a single transaction in a vast project of imperial synthesis. It was a success. It demonstrated that even the most sacred bloodlines of the conquered could be integrated, their symbolic value transferred to strengthen the Ottoman edifice. Theodora's story, or more accurately, the absence of her story, served as a silent lesson to other conquered elites. Resistance could be met with the sword, but compliance would be met with a different kind of oblivion, one dressed in silks and conducted within palace walls. There is no closure to be found in this history, only an echo. The echo is heard in the empty spaces in the archive. It is felt in the chilling efficiency of a state that understood that controlling memory is as important as controlling territory. The conquest of a person is not complete with the signing of a treaty or the taking of a city. It is complete when that person's story can no longer be told, except as a vague prelude to their existence within the conqueror's narrative. The Princess Theodora who entered the harem in 1453 or 1454 was, by the end of her life, someone else. The process was not a dramatic rebellion or a heroic defiance. It was the slow, inexorable weight of days, of routines, of small, necessary compromises that accumulated into a lifetime. She became a testament to the most profound form of power, the power to make a world disappear, not with a bang, but with a whisper, and to replace it with another so total that the first begins to feel like a dream even to the one who dreamed it. The stones of Constantinople still stand in Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia still dominates the skyline. But the last princess of the house that built it left no mark upon the stone. Her mark is the void she left behind, a carefully crafted, administratively enforced silence. In the end, Mehmed II did not do something to Princess Theodora. He placed her into a machine of state, faith, and society, designed to process a princess and produce an Ottoman subject. The machine functioned as intended. The output was silence.